I titled this thing "Potential Surprise Starter on the Niner Defense." What do you think? I mean, are we going to see any surprises? I mean, is Jair Brown have a chance to beat out Tayshaun Gibson? Does Luter have a chance in your mind to beat out Demo Lenore? Those are the ones that really stand out. Maybe Robert Beal. Does Beal have a chance to start at defensive end? Obviously, Isaiah Oliver steps in at the nickel. But do you see any of the young guys having a chance to bust through this summer and maybe earn a starting job?
I think out of all the rookies, the guy that has the biggest chance to start would probably be Luter, because I don't think the 49ers are solidified at the cornerback spot opposite Trevor's Ward. Now, they probably really like Diamador Lenore, and there's some other guys who I'll talk about who my surprise guy might be, but I think there's a legit opportunity for a guy to just step up in camp and say, hey, I'm just better than the other guys you have, whether it's Ambry Thomas, Diamador Lenore, or my surprise starter, which is Womack, Samuel Womack, right? Like that's a guy who's kind of the forgotten guy. He started off the season last year in the slot, ended up being in this kind of more reserve role for whatever reason. I don't know exactly why. Hopefully you guys can get the insight on that. But man, he has a lot of traits. He has a lot of ability. He's not the tallest guy, but he's really long with the arms, and he has that really good speed. And the one thing I like about him, again, I talk about things that you can't teach. He just has a knack for being around the ball and making plays, whether it was him in college at Toledo or in the preseason with the 49ers, picking off 2 passes, forcing a fumble, knocking away another ball that ultimately gets intercepted. Just guys like that, they just continue to find themselves around the ball. He has a knack for it. And that's a guy who I could see taking that year 2 leap and ultimately kind of inserting himself into the starting lineup. So that would be my surprise starter that I don't think a lot of people are.
Let's talk about Luter for a second. I asked him, I said, hey, I watched some of your South Alabama Jaguar games, and I'm like, they used a myriad of coverages. I mean, they played them off cover, they played off coverage, they played zone, but he was locked up on his side on the boundary playing man to man. And I'm just kind of wondering, there's an awful lot of guys who come into the NFL and they only can play zone and they can't play man to man. So we're used to seeing guys who can play zone who can't play man. But have you ever heard of a guy who could play man who couldn't play zone? Or plays on the line of scrimmage and can't play off coverage? I mean, you know better than anybody that there's nuances to playing off coverage and nuances to playing zone that you could argue it's more difficult to play man. But if you're not used to playing off coverage, if you're not used to playing zone, you could be like a fish out of water. How do you think Wilkes ultimately uses Luter?
So I'm really big on what can you teach and what can't you teach, right? And there are a lot of things in football at all positions where it's like, well, I can coach him up there, but man, he has some stuff that just naturally he can just do that other people can't. And when it comes to Darrell Luter, man, just that man ability from press and off is extremely difficult. Man, just having that patience that he has and that time clock that is really slowed down. That's hard to teach. I can tell guys, hey man, stand in there, take away that space, and then once he gets there, kind of collide. And I could teach a guy to do all those things, but is he going to actually apply it? And Luter definitely does. And then as just a man guy in general, I think he's really good there. As far as zone goes, I think it's a lot easier to go from being a good man guy to playing zone as long as you have it upstairs, as opposed to the other way around. Think of a guy like Josh Jackson, the cornerback out of Iowa some years ago. He was a longer cornerback, had a ton of interceptions, and everybody was so high. And I'm like, the guy cannot play man coverage. He was just too long in his movements, clunky feet, but people were really excited because they see the interception totals. And, getting to the NFL, he just did not transition very well. So it's definitely easier, air quotes, to teach a guy more zone principles, especially if they have it mentally. A guy who stayed away from a whole lot of the zone stuff and they went more man heavy with him and they do some combo and zone stuff off of him was Stephon Gilmore with the New England Patriots. I had a little birdie, somebody on the team, and he was like, man, Stephon, you just have him play man coverage. So he never quite grasped the zone concept of things, but he was so good at man coverage, it just didn't matter. So I'm not sure Darrell Luter is Stephon Gilmore, but definitely with his ability, it's something that's definitely intriguing.
One of the things that really jumped out in the OTAs and the rookie camp is the improvement of Marcelino, McCrary-Ball. What an interesting guy, Croc. He shows up in college at Indiana as a corner, then played his entire career there at safety. The Niners draft him as a linebacker. I asked him about halfway through the year. I'm like, why did you even come here? You had Greenlaw here, you had Aziz here, you got Warner, you got special teams backers. I mean, why here? There had to be better places for you to land a job. And he's like, man, these guys are dogs and they coach it up well here and they liked me. And I'm like, you know what? I'll invest the year and you know, I want to be like them. I feel like I'm good enough to run with these guys. I saw him at a dinner the other night in downtown in the city, and man, Marcelino he is just absolutely yoked up right now. He's put on good weight. I don't know what he's weighing. I would say probably 2.25. But I think he's going to take Aziz's job. You mentioned Winters. Does it bother you at all? I mean, I love the Winters film, especially in the national semi against Michigan, where it looked like he was blitzing, but he wasn't. He was just reading his formation and, you know, looking at the mesh point and not hesitating and just attacking and going downhill, shooting gaps. He looked incredible. When we asked him about it, Croc, he's like, yeah, they didn't use me as a blitzer. That was just all film study and me just recognizing off film, you know, down in distance and knowing where I was supposed to be. But Winters had the lowest vertical of any linebacker at the entire combine. I think it was like 30 inches. How important is lower body explosion? Or do you look at that and just say, you know what? Yeah, he's 5'11" and change, 230. Yeah, he doesn't have great lower body explosion, but man, the production at TCU is enough. I mean, obviously you like Winters. I love him as well. I loved him in that game, but how do you see him transitioning? What's his ideal spot? Is he a weak side guy exclusively, or do you think he can play the middle, strong side? How do you see Winters transitioning?
Yeah, I think he's definitely a weak side type of guy. As far as the vertical goes, you know, a lot of people is like, man, why they do all this testing? You just want to see how explosive of an athlete somebody is. So when you see a low vertical like he does, you want to see, man, does that show up on film? And I would say when you see him trigger and close on quarterbacks, it doesn't look like he lacks any type of explosiveness. So, you know, a lot of times you want to see, does what you're seeing on film get confirmed by testing? I would say his 40-yard dash, or not even 40-yard dash, excuse me, his vertical. I would say his vertical is kind of the opposite of what you see on film. So it wouldn't be necessarily a red flag for me, right? Compare it to, let's say, DK Metcalf. And it was very clear when DK Metcalf was coming out, you know, he could run fast. I was looking at the defensive backs, and they were getting in kind of this chase mode. I'm like, man, I think this big dude's going to run like a 4.3. And he did. Now, he also didn't do a whole lot of change of direction type routes. And I think his testing really confirmed that. But with his skill set, it's like, well, you don't need him to do this change of direction type stuff. Have him just run slants, over routes, digs, post, go routes, and stop routes where he gets the cornerback moving vertically. I think when it comes to D Winters, it would be, man, he's explosive, moving forward or laterally down the line of scrimmage, and they could use him in that way. I don't see an area where the lack of vertical explosiveness look to affect him. At least that's not what I saw. But maybe it affected his pockets and being drafted a little bit later, and maybe them questioning it or just finding a reason why he dropped down.
No, it's funny. Womack last year, and I talked to him in the post game a couple times, where he had gotten his hand on a ball, right? Where he had read the quarterback, you know, and came really close to a pick six, but didn't get it. Now you understand the difference between year one and year two. Year one, man, everything's moving fast and you don't see everything quite as clearly. Year two, man, everything is crystallized. You're seeing it better. You're moving faster. You're just mentally more engaged through all the reps. You know your game plan better. I saw last year what you saw, which is he got his hands on a few footballs. I expect him to this year take one or two of those back.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think Womack has got some special traits there. He's 5'9", but that's typical for an NFL corner, maybe a little on the small side, but he's got great arm length, great break, great intellect. I think Womack this year is going to take those two or three footballs last year that he got a hand on. This year he's taking them back for 6. I really think we're going to see it.
I think where the NFL is going, especially the 49ers, they're starting to lean a little bit more quarters heavy. Well, if your quarters heavy, you don't have to have these big press man type guys, right? And he has the length to be able to be a press guy, but can you trigger and diagnose things from off? And the 49ers playing a lot of quarters, keeping things in front of them on early downs, needing guys that can really turn a run and has that vertical speed. That's where he can really shine. I'd say you touched on from year one to year two. And
Yeah.
I don't know exactly the 49ers defense. I'm not like a big scheme guy, but I see some of the things that they do. I can speak from my experience on maybe what he's kind of going through as a rookie, and then how that translated, how he can kind of get better going in the year two. One, playing multiple positions, that's tough at the NFL level. And he was a guy that played outside. He also played in the slot as well. And I think a lot of people, because of the lack of hype, would probably say he's more of a slot. But I think he's a legit outside guy. He can definitely play there. But being uh, they throw so much at you at those spots. It's not just, hey, I'm going to line up on the outside, or I'm going to line up in the slot, and as soon as they call the play, like, that's what it is. You have to know all these different adjustments, right? Whether there's two to your side, one to your side, does a guy motion from the other side, how many backs are to your side, how does that change your responsibility, things that happen on the fly. You have to know at the snap of a finger, okay, now it goes from this to this, and then I have to be able to communicate that to the safety. Like, there's so much that goes into it that happens fast. As a rookie, your head's kind of spinning a little bit trying to learn those things. So I think for a guy like him and some of these other guys too, who we see have like a better year too, like we saw, Diamador Lenore, I think the game starts to slow down a little bit, and then that's when you can kind of see that year two jump for some of these guys.